Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel Dr.Barki's Ophthalmology Tutorials. Today we will discuss about ptosis. Okay, so in this video I will be discussing about the mechanisms, how it produces ptosis, the various types of ptosis, and how to evaluate the ptosis patient, what are the options for the treatment, okay, what are the deciding points in the treatment strategy, and what are the surgical options we have for the ptosis treatment. And in the previous videos, I have covered all the topics of the eyelids like ectropion, entropion, blepharitis, diseases of the glands of the eyelids, everything. So this will be the last topic from the eyelid chapter. So if you have not visited the previous videos, please do go back and visit the previous videos and make use of it. So without much delay, let's begin our video. So what is ptosis? It is nothing but a short form of the word blepharoptosis. Okay. Blepharo is slit and ptosis is the downward displacement. So you must have heard about this word of the visceroptosis. That is, visceroptosis is nothing but downward displacement of any organ from its natural place. So similarly, the blepharoptosis is downward displacement of the eyelid. Okay. So by definition, it is like abnormal drooping of the upper eyelid for more than 2 mm of the cornea in primary gaze. All these words are important. That is, more than 2 mm of cornea, because normally the upper eyelid covers the 2 mm of the cornea. So if it is more than that, it is called ptosis, and it should be in the primary position, because in down gaze and up gaze it may vary. Okay, this is the definition of ptosis. So what causes ptosis? We have retractors in the eyelid, that is levator palpebrae superioris and the Muller's muscle, which keep the eyelid in its normal position. Okay, so if there is weakness in these two muscles, that will lead to ptosis. So it can be in upper lid also, it can be in the lower lid also. So it can be problem with the muscle per se, or the nerve supplied to the muscle, or even the aponeurotic part of the muscle. So that causes weakness of all these muscles, leading to drooping of the eyelid. So that is one mechanism. Next is, there can be some mechanical pull on the eyelid, like a mass in the eyelid or even the capillary hemangioma of the eyelids, that can lead to ptosis. So the classification is like congenital and acquired. The congenital, we have mainly problem with the muscle, that is the LPS muscle. Okay. In acquired, it can be neurogenic. So consider the nerve supply to LPS muscle as well as the Muller's muscle. So if there is third nerve palsy, there will be ptosis, and if there is sympathetic palsy, again we have ptosis. And in myogenic, we have the causes which are related to the muscle, like muscular dystrophy, CPEO, that is chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia, even the ocular fibrosis syndrome. So these are the problems which are related to muscle. Okay, those involving LPS and Muller's muscle, again leading to myogenic ptosis. Next, coming to the aponeurotic ptosis. In aponeurotic ptosis, okay, the previous two classification, that is neurogenic and myogenic, are easily understood. In aponeurotic, we have something to do with the aponeurosis of the LPS muscle. If there is weakness in this aponeurosis or the dehiscence of this aponeurosis from the superior border of the tarsal plate, that can also lead to ptosis. Okay, so that is the mechanism of aponeurotic ptosis. The last one is the mechanical ptosis, which is nothing but secondary to the mass effect on the eyelid, and which is pulling the eyelid down. In congenital ptosis, we have again simple congenital ptosis and complex congenital ptosis. In simple congenital ptosis, we have only ptosis. Okay. In complex type, we have like the ptosis can be associated with superior rectus weakness, or it can be a part of blepharophimosis syndrome, or even it can be associated with Marcus-Gunn jaw winking phenomena. So all these I will be explaining later. So this is the classification of ptosis. So what are the symptoms patients can present with? So with this, you can imagine what the symptoms can be. Like the patient will have the obvious drooping of the eyelid. So depending upon the position of the eyelid, whether it is covering the pupillary area or not, patient will have visual symptoms. If it is covering the pupillary area, patient will not have any vision. Okay, it's almost blocking the visual axis. Or if it is above the pupillary area, but still it can compress over the cornea constantly, leading to astigmatism and blurred vision. And if the cause is like myasthenia gravis, okay, then the patient can have double vision because of the involvement of the extraocular muscles also. And there can be variability of the ptosis. Like in the morning, patient can be normal. As the day progresses, the ptosis can worsen. So these are the symptoms patients will present with, like drooping of the eyelids, astigmatism, diminution of vision, and double vision. And the variability of the ptosis can be a symptom. So when you consider the evaluation of the ptosis, you should always concentrate on vision and refraction first. This is most neglected part, since the ptosis can occur in the pediatric age group. If you don't concentrate on the vision, which can be corrected with the refraction, you are leading the patient to the amblyopia. Okay, so the amblyopia becomes irreversible. So always take time to check the vision and also do refraction and give proper correction. Then coming to the head posture. So if the patient is having unilateral ptosis, there need not be any abnormal head postures. If the patient is having bilateral ptosis, then the patient will usually assume the chin lift position. Okay, the chin is elevated, like the patient will turn his head little back so that he will clear the pupillary axis and have a good vision. That is about the head posture. In the facial symmetry, again in bilateral ptosis, you can see that the eyebrows are highly arched, means the frontalis muscle is put into action to pull the eyelids. So there will be highly arched eyebrows, and on examination you can confirm that there is ptosis. So next, when you notice there is obvious ptosis, go to the proper evaluation of the ptosis. So before that, you should differentiate whether it is a true ptosis or the pseudoptosis. So what is pseudoptosis? It appears as if the patient is having ptosis, but actually there is no ptosis. The causes can be when the eyelid loses its support on the posterior surface, like enophthalmos or microphthalmos, where the eyeball itself is small, the eyelids tend to droop down. So that can be one cause of your pseudoptosis. The example is the eyelid retraction of the other eye. So that will also give appearance of pseudoptosis. The third is when there is hypotropia, that is the eyeball is looking down because of the squint. So that is hypotropia. Then also the eyelid will follow the eyeball, so it appears as if the patient is having ptosis. So when you do your cover test, that is when you cover the normal eye, this hypotropic eye will go up and take up fixation. Thereby it will correct the ptosis also spontaneously. That's how you can differentiate the true ptosis from pseudoptosis. So next we will move on to the ptosis evaluation proper. In this I will be discussing the headings under which the examination should be done, and the method of examination and the clinical relevance of each test. Okay. So the first one is you should quantify the amount of ptosis. As you can see in these two pictures, here in the first one the eyelid ptosis appears to be little mild. Okay, whereas in the second picture you can see it's almost covering the cornea. So this is a severe type of ptosis. So amount of ptosis, it can be graded as mild if the ptosis is 2 mm, moderate if the ptosis is 3 mm, and severe if it is 4 mm and covering the pupillary axis. So this you can quantify by measuring the interpalpebral aperture, okay, and then subtracting it from the normal interpalpebral aperture. So that will give the amount of ptosis. It is important to quantify because the surgical treatment for the ptosis will differ depending upon the amount of ptosis also. The next thing is the lid crease. As you can see in this picture, there is a prominent lid crease in the right eye. Okay, see, the prominent lid crease is present in the right eye, whereas that's not there in the left eye, because and it is a clinching point towards your congenital ptosis. Since there is dystrophy of the LPS muscle in congenital ptosis, the few fibers which were inserting on the posterior aspect of the skin, which were giving rise to the eyelid margin, are absent here. So the lid crease is also absent. You can't make out any lid crease here. So the normal lid crease, that is the distance between the upper eyelid margin to the lid crease, is 5 to 7 mm depending upon the sex of the patient. So why it is important? One is for the diagnosis of the congenital ptosis, and the second is to mark the part where you have to create a lid crease to give a good cosmetic outcome. Okay, so if you just lift the upper eyelid, it will create a very faint lid crease. So that point also you can take for marking to produce the lid crease post-operatively to give a good cosmetic outcome. So the next important thing is interpalpebral aperture or IPA. IPA is nothing but distance between upper eyelid and the lower eyelid in the primary position. Normal interpalpebral aperture in males is 7 to 10 mm, whereas in females it is 8 to 12 mm. So this should be checked in primary position of gaze, down gaze as well as up gaze. The clinical relevance is when you check the interpalpebral aperture in down gaze, in case of congenital ptosis, the interpalpebral aperture will be more in down gaze compared to the primary position. So that will also lead to the diagnosis of congenital ptosis. This is about interpalpebral aperture. The next is margin reflex distance or MRD 1, 2, 3. So what is MRD 1? That is the distance between the upper eyelid and the corneal reflex in the primary position. Okay, distance between upper eyelid margin to the corneal reflex in the primary position is margin reflex distance 1. So this will confirm about the amount of ptosis also. That is one of the uses of MRD1. So coming to MRD2, it is nothing but distance between the corneal reflex and the lower eyelid in the primary position again. Okay, so this is helpful in case of your lower eyelid retraction, as it is seen in this picture. There is some amount of lower eyelid retraction, means normal position of the lower eyelid is it should just touch the limbus, but it has gone down. So in these cases it will help in making a diagnosis. The third one is margin reflex distance 3. This is nothing but the distance between upper eyelid margin to the corneal reflex in the up gaze. I will tell the significance of this later. So the next measurement is margin limbal distance. This is nothing but the distance between the upper eyelid to the lower limbus in up gaze. Normally it is around 9 mm. So when you want to plan for a LPS resection in the surgery, then how much LPS resection you should do, that you can calculate from margin limbal distance. So suppose when you do this margin limbal distance and measure and you get some amount of 4 mm, the normal is usually 9. So if you subtract that 4 from 9, you will get 5, then multiply that by 3. So that gives the amount of LPS resection that should be done. Okay, so I will repeat again, if the margin limbal distance is 4, so subtract it from 9, so you are getting 5, multiply that by 3, so 15. So the 15 mm is the amount of LPS resection you should plan for. But if there is associated superior rectus weakness, as I told in one of the congenital forms where there can be superior rectus weakness, then this margin limbal distance is not useful, because the eyeball is not moving up at all. So then you should consider the margin reflex distance 3, the MRD3, which I was telling previously. So the normal margin reflex distance is considered 7 mm. So the next step is same, that is if you get MRD3 of around say 3 mm, then subtract 3 from 7, you will get 4, multiply that by 3 again. So the 12 mm of LPS resection you should plan for. So that is the significance of MRD3 as well as the margin limbal distance. The next is the LPS function. This is most important thing, because all your surgical plan depends upon the LPS function. And the method what we use is called as Berkes method again. So here you are blocking the frontalis action by your thumb. Just give a gentle massage above the eyebrows and block the frontalis action. And then ask patient to look in extreme down gaze. Keep a scale at 0 in the down gaze. Then ask patient to look in extreme up gaze. So the amount of lid excursion gives the LPS function. So the normal LPS function is more than 15. It is good when it is 12 to 14. It is fair when it is 5 to 11. And it is poor when it is less than 4. So this is shown in the video next, how to measure the LPS function. So depending upon the LPS function, you are planning the surgery. So if the LPS function is good to fair or good to normal, then you can consider LPS resection. If it is very poor, like less than 4 mm, then the surgical option will be frontalis link operation. Okay.
Palpebral function test.
And the next important thing which usually people forget is the ocular movements. Always check for all the extraocular movements, look for associated squint, and if there is, it will alter the amount of ptosis. So whenever there is associated squint and the ptosis, you should always address the squint first, then eyelid take up some position. Depending upon that, you should plan for the ptosis surgery. Next important thing is the Bell's phenomena. Here you are checking for the Bell's phenomenon in that particular patient to plan for the surgery again. If the Bell's phenomenon is very poor, then there are chances of exposure keratitis post-operatively. Then you should not be very aggressive when you are treating the ptosis. Just leave the lid in such a position that patient is having good vision and also protect the cornea. So how to examine the Bell's phenomena is shown in the video again. So here you ask the patient to close the eyelids tightly and try to lift the upper eyelid. Normal Bell's phenomena is the patient's cornea will move up and out. So if it is not going in that way, is remaining in the primary position itself, then the Bell's phenomena is said to be poor. This is the most important thing, that is Marcus gun jaw winking phenomenon. This is nothing but the synkinetic movement. That is, whenever the patient moves his jaw to the opposite side, the ptotic eyelid will elevate. Okay, so this is because of the misinnervation, that is from the trigeminal nerve, which is innervating the lateral pterygoid muscle. Okay, and also the oculomotor nerve, which is innervating the LPS. So there is miscommunication between these two. So whenever the lateral pterygoid is put into action by the movement of the jaw to the opposite side, then there will be elevation of the lid. This is important because the surgical plan for a simple ptosis is completely different from that associated with the Marcus gun jaw winking phenomena. If there is Marcus gun jaw winking phenomena with the ptosis, the surgical plan is you should always disinsert the LPS muscle from the tarsal plate, followed by the frontalis sling surgery. Okay.
Marcus gun jaw winking.
Always look for the corneal sensations again to prevent the exposure keratitis postoperatively. If the corneal sensations are poor, again consider being less aggressive in treating the ptosis patient. The dry eye evaluation, same thing for the to prevent the postoperative exposure keratitis and dry eye symptoms. Be little less aggressive in treating the ptosis patient here also. Then we have specific tests for the myasthenia gravis. If you think that the ptosis is secondary to myasthenia, like if the patient is having diplopia or the double vision with a variable ptosis and you think could be because of the myasthenia, then go for the following tests. That is, the first one is the fatigability test. Here you ask the patient to look in the up gaze. First you measure the amount of ptosis, then ask the patient to look in up gaze, okay, for almost 2 to 5 minutes. Then you can see there is gradual drooping of the upper eyelid. That goes in favor of myasthenia. Okay, that is positive fatigability test.
After 1 minute.
The next is the Kogan twitch sign. So ask patient to look in down gaze, extreme down gaze, followed by to look at a target in the primary position. The patient will not fixate at the target. Instead, he will look up a little bit, followed by the fixation to the target. That is about Kogan twitch sign. Again, a test to confirm the myasthenia gravis. The ice pack test. Here also first measure the amount of ptosis. Keep the ice pack over the eyelids for around 5 minutes. Then again measure the amount of ptosis. There will be drastic improvement in the amount of ptosis. So that indicates that it could be myasthenia. Other confirmatory tests for myasthenia are hydrophonium test, acetylcholine receptor antibody test, and single fiber electromyography can be done to confirm the ptosis. So in hydrophonium test, which is done to confirm the myasthenia gravis, we are using 2 mg of hydrophonium, which is injected slowly over 15 to 30 seconds, and we wait for 1 minute. If there is no untoward effect, then inject 8 mg of hydrophonium again, and after 1 to 5 minutes there will be drastic improvement in the ptosis. So that will confirm about the myasthenia again. So we'll discuss about the specific features of each type of ptosis. In congenital ptosis, the cause is the dystrophic LPS muscle. Means the LPS muscle is neither contracting or nor relaxing. So it can be unilateral in almost 70% of the cases. In the remaining it can be bilateral. The amount of ptosis can be mild, moderate, severe, and even the LPS function is most of the time poor, and it usually correlates with the amount of ptosis. And when you examine the patient, there is no lid crease, and when the patient is looking in the down gaze, the interpalpebral aperture is more than that is seen in the primary position of the gaze. Okay, and also look for the superior rectus, which can be an associated problem in case of complex congenital ptosis. So what next? Once you have diagnosed a case of congenital ptosis, so how you want to go about the case? So that depends upon the age of the patient as well as the severity of the ptosis. So if the ptosis is very severe, like it is covering the pupillary area, then your intervention should be immediate. If the patient is fit for surgery, you can take up for sling surgery, or if the child is not fit for surgery, then use the crutch glasses temporarily to lift the eyelids. Thereby you are creating a normal visual axis. This is not so severe, means the pupillary axis is spared, then you can buy some time. You can intervene at the age of 3 to 4 years, where the eyelids are normally, means the structures of the eyelid is well developed. Then your intervention will be easy. Till then you should take care of the vision and refraction to prevent the amblyopia. So coming to the neurogenic ptosis, here we have third nerve palsy, Horner syndrome and myasthenia gravis. Okay, so coming to third nerve palsy. So if there is third nerve palsy, there will be complete ptosis most of the time, along with the involvement of the extraocular muscles like superior rectus, medial rectus and the inferior rectus. So the eye will be in the down and out position with a complete ptosis with mydriasis. So this confirms the third nerve palsy. In these cases, we usually give some time for the nerve to regenerate. That is around 6 months we will wait and look for the improvement. After 6 months, examine the patient again to look for the amount of ptosis and also associated squint if it is there. So depending upon the amount of ptosis and the squint, the surgical plan will differ. Okay, so if it is associated with squint, always correct the squint first, then followed by the ptosis surgery. That ptosis surgery again depends upon the amount of ptosis and the LPS function. Okay, coming to the next type, that is Horner syndrome, which is secondary to the sympathetic palsy. The sympathetic nervous system is supplying the Muller's muscle, which is responsible for the initial 2 mm lift of the eyelid. So in case of Horner syndrome, there will be very mild ptosis of around 2 mm. And when you do the phenylephrine test, that is, you put phenylephrine eye drops into the eye and look for the ptosis, there will be drastic improvement in the ptosis. Okay, because the phenylephrine will stimulate the sympathetic receptors on the Muller's muscle, giving rise to improvement in the ptosis. So that will confirm that it is secondary to the Horner syndrome. And there can be associated features of the Horner syndrome, like just remember the mnemonic ample. Okay, so ample, A is nothing but anhydrosis on the affected side, M for the meiosis, P for the ptosis, L for the loss of celospinal reflex, and E for the mild amount of enophthalmos. And even there is reverse ptosis, that is, the lower eyelid will also move up to some extent. Okay, because of the sympathetic palsy. That is about your Horner syndrome. So here the surgical plan is the fascicular cervex procedure, which I will be explaining in the surgical part. The third one in the neurogenic ptosis is the myasthenia gravis. So once you have confirmed that it is secondary to the myasthenia gravis, it has to be treated by the physician for the myasthenia gravis. So that will improve the ptosis also. If there is no improvement or if it is visually disabilitating the patient, then you will have to plan the surgery. Next type is the myogenic ptosis. Here we have so many conditions like chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia, or even the oculofibrosis syndrome or the muscular dystrophies. So the LPS muscle is not functioning well, leading to the ptosis. Usually the amount of ptosis is correlating with the amount of LPS function, and the surgical plan will also depend upon the LPS function. That is about myogenic ptosis. There are no specific features which will tell that it is myogenic. Maybe the associated features like the CPEO patient will have even the ocular motility restriction, the ocular fibrosis syndrome will have similar features. So that can clinch towards the diagnosis of myogenic ptosis. The next important one is the aponeurotic ptosis, which is most common cause of the acquired ptosis. Okay, most common cause of acquired ptosis is the aponeurotic ptosis, also called as senile ptosis or involutional ptosis. It can also occur following trauma, can occur during pregnancy, in case of chronic recurrent edema of the eyelids, the rigid contact lens usage. Okay, so all these can be the causes of aponeurotic ptosis. Here there is no problem with the LPS muscle per se, but the aponeurosis which is inserting onto the tarsal plate has some weakness or complete disinsertion at the tarsal plate, leading to the drooping of the eyelid. So because of these features, the eyelid appears little thin compared to other cases, that is papery thin appearance of the eyelid, and there will be lid crease will be higher up compared to the other cases. Okay, so normal lid crease position is 5 to 7 mm from the upper eyelid margin. Here it is more than that. And when you examine, patient will usually have severe ptosis, but when you check for the LPS function, it is very good, unlike in other cases where the LPS function was correlating with the amount of ptosis. But here the severity of the ptosis is not correlating with the LPS, means there is very severe ptosis with good LPS function. So this sentence always goes in favor of aponeurotic ptosis. The surgical option is again the LPS resection, or if there is dehiscence from the tarsal plate, reattachment of the aponeurosis to the tarsal plate. Coming to the mechanical ptosis, here which usually follows some tumor or the mass in the eyelid which is pulling the eyelid down, like in case of neurofibromatosis, or when there is capillary hemangioma which is diffusely spread all over the eyelid, so which will pull the eyelid down. So that is in case of mechanical ptosis. The capillary hemangioma I have discussed in the congenital anomalies of the eyelids. There you can see. So surgeries, we have fascicular cervical operation, levator resection, and the frontalis sling surgery. The surgical part I will discuss in a separate video, where I will be explaining about the indications of surgery, method of surgery, and also the pros and cons and the complications of surgery. So hope this video was very useful about the ptosis evaluation. This is helpful for all the postgraduates also. Please do make use of this video, and if you like my videos on the ophthalmology chapters, please do subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon for the further notifications. Please do like and share my videos. Thank you so much.